Hello everyone, and welcome to today's workshop, all about our oral history interviewing grant at Humanities DC. My name is Hilary Steen, and I just wanted to, again, thank you all for being here. Welcome to the workshop. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording, as well as the PowerPoint slides, will be available on our website soon, and they will also be emailed out to all of you too. If you would like captions for this presentation, if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's an ellipses, and you should be able to get captions that way. If you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to interrupt me, and you can also write questions in the chat. There will be some specific points in the presentation that will be Q&A focused, but if you have questions throughout the presentation, feel free to just come in and ask. All right, so this is just an overview of what today's meeting will look like. So we're going to start off talking about Humanities DC and what we do as an organization. Then we will dive into what exactly is oral history, as well as the DC Oral History Collaborative. Then I will talk about the actual oral history interviewing grant and provide a few current examples of grantees under this umbrella. Then I will turn the camera over to all of you to do some brief room introductions to start thinking about your projects. And then I'll dive into the grant specifics of this grant, work through the application questions, provide an overview of the review process, and that will be that for today. I am going to move pretty quickly through this presentation. We have an hour and a half and we might use all of it. But again, this will be recorded and the slides will be sent out soon. So again, my name is Hilary Steen, and I'm one of the community grants managers at Humanities DC. And I am your main point of contact for oral history interviewing grant, as well as DCOHC grant related questions. I'm also your point of contact for any application questions for this particular grant as well. And my contact info is at the bottom here. So Leah, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Leah Gage. I am the other community grants manager at Humanities DC. I don't manage the oral history interviewing grant, but I'm available for questions throughout the grant period. And my contact info is there as well.
Right. And Loy, I see you are on if you want to come off mute really quickly to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Loy Namar, Director of Grant Making and Programs. Really glad you're all here to learn about this particular grant.
Another member of our team is Jasper Collier, and he is the Senior Manager of the DC Oral History Collaborative. And you won't really be in touch with him too much as an applicant, but if you become a grantee, you would be working with him very closely on the programmatic pieces of any DCOHC grant that we have here. And so just wanted to provide a brief overview of what Humanities DC is and what we do. So we are one of 56 state and territorial humanities councils. We've been around for almost over 40 years at this point. So Humanities DC is DC's Humanities Council. And here we connect curious people with bold questions to the powerful stories of our vibrant city. And we do that through both grant making and public programs. Really, everything that we do helps connect residents to storytellers and creators who are already doing the humanities work, just like all of you. So we essentially provide a platform for them to share their perspectives and expertise. And so I want to quickly talk about our wonderful public programs, which again is one side of our organization. And we have several that happen throughout the year. One is community journalism. And the applications for being involved in community journalism just closed, but just for future reference, This is a training program for local journalists and hopeful journalists to teach them around about print journalism skills and best practices. Another public program that we have is our monthly culture series. Some of you might have attended some of our culture series in the past, where humanists give talks about cool humanities topics all over DC, and they happen monthly. Another public program is the DC Oral History Collaborative, which I will get into very deeply during this presentation. It is a collaboration we have with the DC Public Library all about oral history interviewing. And we also have several fellowships available as well. And I want to especially highlight our Independent Practitioners Fellowship, which supports individuals for $10,000 over several months to create and have an idea of a humanities project. So all independent practitioner fellows form a cohort and meet monthly to discuss their project ideas and discuss the humanities. If you're interested in becoming a fellow with us, the application for that closes Monday. If you're interested, I highly recommend you look at our website for more information. So those are our wonderful public programs, but now shifting over to the community grant side. So Humanities DC gives roughly $1 million to 60 plus grantees across 8 wards, and we expect to continue doing that in 2025 as well. And so here is a full list of all 6 of our grant applications that will be available in cycle 1. You might have heard of other grant opportunities that we have available, and it's just really exciting stuff. And so I want to briefly show you all the website where you can learn more about all 6 grant opportunities. So our website is humanitiesdc.org, and you go especially to the community grants toggle and then go to grant opportunities. And again, this is where you would find information about all 6 grant opportunities. And so since this is the Oral History Interviewing Grant Workshop, which is under the DC Oral History Collaborative Grants umbrella, just going to click on there. And on this website is where you can find information about the 3 DCOHC grant opportunities that we will have in 2025. So oral history interviewing, which is what this workshop is about, is right at the top. And it breaks down information about eligibility, how much funding you can request, etc., as well as the RFP, or the request for a proposal. The RFP lays out a lot of the information that I'm going to talk about during this presentation, and it talks more in depth about eligibility criteria, reporting requirements, what's involved in this project, a lot of things. So I recommend that if you have not looked at the RFP yet, that you should if you are interested in applying. Other links on this page include a full list of all the application questions, information about the grants portal, which is where you would actually submit your application, FAQ documents, and a lot of other goodies. So I recommend taking a look at the website when you have time. So now going back to the slides. Okay, so before I really dive into oral history, I wanted to open it up to the room. I'm wondering if anyone in the room can define what the humanities are for us. If you want to take yourself off mute, or you're welcome to type it into the chat. If anyone wants to be a brave person right now.
Good afternoon. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well. Would it be the human experience? Just the landscape of human experiences?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And I see in the chat, someone said study of human experience. Someone else said philosophies and history. Great answers.
Hillary, this is Raw. I'll go with what humans create.
Wonderful. Thank
Well, I'm cheating a little bit too.
My cheat is to read the website. History, literature, languages, ethics, philosophy, and arts appreciation.
Yes, correct. Yeah, we see in the chat social sciences as well. Study of human arts, language, literature, and history. These are all great answers. And so, yeah, you are correct. The humanities allow us to navigate the complexities of our past, present, and future. They help us learn, they help us empathize, as well as challenge our assumptions. They are a compass for interpreting what humans make and exploring what makes us human. And we realize that the humanities definition is pretty broad, so we also break it down by discipline, which some of you have already noted earlier. So those include history, anthropology, archaeology, literature, language, and art history, art theory, art criticism, as well as ethics, philosophy, comparative religion, and law. So thank you all for your great answers. And so shifting a little bit, I wanted to explain a little bit about what oral history actually is. So oral history interviews are specialized interviews in which you ask about someone's life story. So instead of a narrow series of questions like what you might find in journalism, these are broad scale interviews in which you are asking someone about how their life might intersect with historical events, or vice versa. And it really just adds perspective to the whole historical record that we have. And oral history interviews rely on memory. So oral history captures recollections about the past, filtered through the lens of a changing personal and social context. And oral histories are tools that are incredibly useful that can help us within all areas of the humanities. And so if you are interested in conducting oral history interviews, there are so many different angles you can take, so many different historical events you can ask someone about, etc. And you can also interview people about quote unquote non-humanities topics as well, such as if you wanted to interview doctors or scientists, that still definitely falls under the humanities because you're using oral history interviewing for all of that. And throughout the presentation, I might say a word called narrator, and on the screen, the word narrator might show up as well. And just FYI, a narrator is the person being interviewed. So they're the interviewee, if you will. And so jumping off of that, oral history is quite important. So it allows us to strengthen our community and inform new generations over time. It is interdisciplinary, and it's a way for us to produce historical documents for future generations in order to better understand lived experiences of history and the many meanings that people make of all these experiences. It allows us to understand experiences that produce perspectives that are different from one's own. And oral history interviewing is relatively easy to learn, but it's difficult to master. So some people on this call right now might have extensive experience conducting oral history interviews. And I bet they would say that there is always new things to learn about this art form. And on the right here are two photos from a pop-up event that we at Humanities DC did this past year called Stories in Motion, in which we helped people at a local street fair conduct oral history interviews with each other, and it was a great event. And so I'm just going to show a brief video all about the DC Oral History Collaborative, and then I will go into detail about the collaborative itself.
I'm a native Washingtonian. I'm from Southeast DC. I model, I dance, I act.
I am an archaeologist.
I am a unique, interesting person.
There's a lot of stereotypes about DC that are thrown around.
You know, that's just a place where our government is.
To where politics reigns supreme.
But it's actually community and home to a lot of people.
It's much more diverse neighborhoods and historic neighborhoods that people don't really know about.
So we have to give the narrative, the experiences.
And through oral histories, I really want to highlight these contributions that people don't typically know or aren't necessarily.
And I see you're not seeing the video, so one moment. Sorry about that.
Hillary, I'm able to see the video.
Yeah, and some of us are seeing it, Hillary. I'm seeing it
Okay.
as well.
Cool.
Yeah, it looks like some
All
people.
right, maybe
I'll send the link over to.
we'll send the link if you can, please, Leah.
Written about in historical records. It's so easy to just feel like your group is not important if all you learn about is what this person did, what Christopher Columbus did.
There's a lot of resilience that goes into being able to survive those circumstances and still come out on the other side and say, we can be better.
So just to sit down and talk to someone and give them the opportunity to just to tell their life narrative is a very special thing. It's almost like your imagination is ignited.
Just every time you think you know what someone's going to say, they're going to say something different. And that's fabulous.
Your story is important. Your history is important.
It's kind of like giving a gift to the next generation. And when you share it, and you'd be so surprised and so shocked at how many people be like, oh my God, I went through that too. When our children and grandchildren look to us for inspiration, they're going to learn from us and whatever it is that we try to do.
So it's important to have these stories and to share these stories and to shout these stories and to sing these stories to inspire others, not only to step up to the plate and feel good about themselves, but to share their stories as well.
So I wanted to explain now exactly what the DC Oral History Collaborative is. So like I mentioned earlier, it is a partnership that we have with the DC Public Library, and it allows us to document and preserve oral history interviews and oral history through grant making, through training, as well as through public projects. And if you become a grantee underneath the DCOHC umbrella, which includes oral history interviewing, then you would be considered members of the collaborative. And you'll get lots of really cool benefits, including access to training, ongoing guidance, potential for partnership programs, etc. It's a really great program that we have with the public library. And so there are 3 grant opportunities underneath DCOHC: oral history interviewing, which again, that's what we're discussing today. Another opportunity in cycle 1 is called Beyond the Archives. And if you're interested in learning more about that, we're actually doing a workshop tomorrow about Beyond the Archives. So I recommend, if you're interested, if you want to learn more, to sign up for tomorrow's webinar. And then in cycle 2, we have another grant opportunity called Continuing Oral History Projects. We will send more information about that later in the spring because it is during cycle 2, so it will open up a little bit later. But it has a lot of similarities to oral history interviewing. It is focused only for applicants who have completed an already funded oral history project with Humanities DC. But more information about that will come out later. But now let's dive into oral history interviewing. So these are projects that explore DC life, history, and culture through interviews with the people who have lived it. This opportunity is open up to DC-based individuals as well as community groups and 501c3 nonprofit organizations. You can receive up to $8,000, and that would allow you to conduct and archive at least 5 oral history interviews. However, you can also request an additional $5,000 if you're interested in translating transcripts into different languages too. All grantees have to submit something called a deliverable or deliverables. And these are requirements that are requirements because it allows us to archive everything that you worked on your project on in the People's Archive at the DC Public Library. And so these deliverables would include media files, transcripts, indexes, release forms, and metadata. And it is totally okay if none of those terms make any sense, because a really cool thing about this grant is that we provide extensive hands-on, in-depth training, especially at the beginning of the project period. So on May 6th, 8th, and 12th, all grantees must attend this in-person oral history training workshop. It will happen in the evening at MLK Library in downtown DC. So if you are a grantee, you have to attend these 3 workshops. And this is for all grantees, even if you do have experience conducting oral histories elsewhere, because we really try to create a cohort of oral history interviewing grantees, as well as, you can always learn new things about how to conduct these interviews anyway. The application for this is due on February 18th of 2025. And at the bottom of the slide here is a link to the RFP. So again, that's the request for a proposal that I noted on the website earlier, and that will provide a more detailed breakdown about what is involved in how to do all of this. And it is totally fine if you have never conducted oral history interviews before. If, again, you don't know what a metadata is or anything like that, because again, we provide extensive training and we definitely encourage people who have never conducted oral history interviews, as well as experienced practitioners, to apply for this grant. We provide help every step of the way in this project, and many of our grantees actually have never conducted oral history interviews until they received funds from us, which is pretty exciting. And I see in the chat, what if we already took the workshop? Linda is in a class this week. So a cool thing about the DC Oral History Collaborative is that we have trainings throughout the year for the public to come and enjoy. All the training workshops are free, and like Jasper said in the chat, the grantee session has more grant-specific info. So even if you have attended DCOHC workshops in other capacities, you would still have to attend the trainings on May 6th, 8th, and 12th.
Hillary, I have a question, if it's okay. Yeah, is it possible for a oral history project to exist in 2 places at the same time? So since we know that this funded project will exist in MLK Library in the section, and could that, say, for example, could that project also be in the Rainbow History archives as well, since they're 2 related oral history projects? Could those same interviews be used, or would that not be required if you're getting this grant? Not be allowed if you're getting this grant?
That's a good question. Jasper, do you know the answer to that?
Hi, Ron. Just kind of go into it. We can definitely discuss it more, but the release form that is signed for the oral histories that are submitted through this grant provides or allows for what is it called? non-exclusive license to the project director and the narrator. So the project director conducting the interviews, as well as the narrators, are able to use the interviews in whatever way they like. And I can't see why that wouldn't extend to also putting it in their like organizational or individual archive.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Right. So now I want to talk about some examples of current grantee projects. One of them is from Leslie Arun Walsh, and her project is called Bank on Her, Exploring the Effects of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So Leslie and her team are interviewing adult women who lived during the 1970s to see how their lives were changed due to the passing of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which allowed women to have more financial independence. Another current example is from grantee Shilpi Malinowski, and her project is called Mount Pleasant, The Rise and Fall of Cultural Community Centers. So Shilpi is interviewing residents of Mount Pleasant to talk about their relationships to local community institutions in the neighborhood, including the Latin American Youth Center and Bancroft Elementary School. So I don't know if any of you have already started looking at the application itself, but one key part of the application is for you to describe your area of interest or your research topic. So this would explain basically an overarching summary of what you are doing. And I wanted to provide 2 examples for all of you as you start thinking about the details of your project. So this particular one is from grantee Deanna Monet Burton, who's a current grantee. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I do want to emphasize the bolded parts of this because this really gets to the crux of what Deanna is doing with her project. So she writes, while existing archives of women in the DC dance community can be found through short videos and possibly newspaper articles, their specific oral histories offer more perspective on their challenges and motivations of building their skill and their attempts at connecting with local communities in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Through their oral histories, I want to gain an understanding of their firsthand accounts of studios that existed where they either taught or learned, any affiliations to community groups, and exploring their impact on culture and dance history in DC. So this area of interest is great for a few reasons. It is very specific. So Deanna is thinking about women in the DC dance community, specifically in the late 2000s and early 2010s. She also explains why she thinks oral history is the best tool to gain these stories as well. So she is specific, she is succinct, and she is descriptive as well. And another example is from current grantee Noel Schroeder. And Noel and their team, their project is called Ward 2 Mutual Aid History Project. Sorry about the small print on here. I won't read everything, but I do want to focus again on the bolded areas. So this project will interview unhoused residents, primarily Black long-term residents and Native Washingtonians, and housing insecure residents, primarily Salvadoran first and second generation immigrants. We will interview members of the wider Ward 2 Mutual Aid Network, focusing on our 2 key underserved communities to document their evolving experiences with housing insecurity and related DC support systems from 2020 through 2024, and how they worked and organized to address these issues and build community care and safety. Oral history is ideal for this project for both story collection and presentation. Oral storytelling will be more accessible to narrators to share their stories and to community members to experience those stories. The format is more personable and a better fit to our collective's mission to reflect the material conditions of residents' lives. So just like the previous example, this written blurb is specific. So it talks about who will be interviewed, i.e. the unhoused residents and housing insecure residents during a specific period of time from 2020 through 2024. And Noel also wrote about why oral history would be a good fit for this kind of project. So again, as you're thinking about your project, keep all of these things in mind, who you want to interview and why you think oral history is a key tool for you to use for this kind of project. And so with that, now that I gave you a few examples, I was wondering if anyone in the room would like to introduce themselves. If you're affiliated with an organization, you can talk about that a little bit. And we want to hear a little bit about what project you're considering and why oral history is the best project format. So feel free to come off mute or write in the chat. I don't think we'll have time to go through everyone's ideas, but if anyone would like to start us off.
Hello, good morning.
Morning.
So I guess I'll chime in just because no one else was. So decades ago, I kept a blog, and my blog was somewhat bike centric, but I blogged about DC art, culture, life, etc. And so over that time, I took photos of cyclists in various aspects of the DC cycling community, including but not limited to DC bicycle messengers. And so I was interested, and I was hoping this applies, maybe not to this grant, but maybe you could direct me to one of other grants. It's a multi-tiered project. I recently compiled 20 years of these photos of bike messengers, and I've created the drafts of books, which I've released as photo books, but I'd like to do an oral history project that coincides with my photos, so I could use these photos to tell the stories of this work culture, a very unique work culture that existed for a time and has changed and may not exist much longer, or will exist as something else. And so that's where I'm at. I was thinking I would do it in podcast format so that people could see the videos, and then I would be able to have that information so I could transcribe that information to book format. So that's where I'm at. That's what I'm doing. And that's the kind of the grant concept backing that I would need.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon, Victoria Jackson calling from MICA. Right now I'm at my ending of my Master of Fine Arts, and my thesis is I'm collecting stories of African American women who served in the armed forces. Being a Washingtonian as well, I have done, so far I have did 13 interviews of women who served in the armed forces. It has become more of a recording / podcast, and they are actually telling their stories of their experience from, I have one who did World War II. I have a couple who has been in from all branches. So I'm trying to figure out how to actually affiliate this thesis project, because it's going to take me over into when I get ready to enter Howard University historical PhD project program in history. So I'm still trying to work my way with this. So that's where I'm at right now. This is my last year at MICA with my MFA. So, but we're going to continue this project once I get into Howard.
Very nice, thank you.
Hi, Hillary. I'll go since no one else has stepped up. My project that that I've been working on for quite some time is 50 plus years of LGBTQ plus elected officials. It's a very important project because DC is in this year celebrating their 50th year of home rule, and DC also celebrating, now that you have an out elected official. But my project is saying that DC has always had elected LGBTQ officials that were serving in the role of the ANC capacity. And I wanted to highlight and tell those stories of those officials over the last 50 years.
Great, thank you. Nice to see
Hey.
you. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hi. My name is Lark. I actually was just speaking with the Ward 2 one that you were talking about, and I also heard from other Ward 2 mutual aid folks about when they did the fellowship. So it got me intrigued. I was like, okay, DC Humanities, what is it all about? I will admit I'm very overwhelmed, so I'm not sure which one would be best fit for my idea. So I did schedule a one-on-one, but yeah, I'm with Ward 5 mutual aid, and so I guess I want to figure out. I feel like mutual aid is very unique compared to, we don't want to consider ourselves a charity. And I want to explore storytelling about the potential of mutual aid and how we can move forward, especially with the new politics coming into DC. So yeah, I have concepts, I guess, still, but hopefully I can figure out a solid plan by time of deadline. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Time for one more person who, if you want to close this out.
Okay.
Oh, Stephanie, you're on mute.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. You can hear me okay now?
Yes.
Great.
Oh, now you're back on mute. Oops.
No way. Okay. Well, my name is Stephanie McGill, and my organization's name is the Soul Train, which is designed to connect communities. My project idea was in chronicling the forts that the Civil War forts in Washington, D.C., and how they were instrumental in constructing the communities around them. My thought also was I'm going to, of course, enlist the help of the park rangers. I'm starting with Fort Davis because that's personally an area that I am familiar with, and the national park that is Fort DuPont that's connected, and the different neighborhoods like Fairfax Village, and how the Civil War forts were very instrumental in the history of DC and that particular station. I want to have a community activity with the youth to kind of construct a fort, a makeshift fort, and get the history, the oral history done through that. I'm really excited because my idea is to foster nature and the stewardship within the community by giving the oral history of the forts and the land space around them, and how we can use them to learn from the past, how it affects our future and our present, and be better stewards of the forest. So that's my project idea, and I look forward to developing it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, these are great ideas, everyone. And it's just so cool to hear the different topics you're all interested and the scopes. So it's always exciting to hear from the community like this. So I want to dive into a little bit more about the grant requirements for the oral history interviewing grant. And a lot of this information, again, is in the RFP, but I want to talk about that now as well. So like I said earlier, If you become a grantee, you must attend the 3-session oral history training workshop on May 6th, May 8th, and May 12th, all at MLK Library in the evening. And it is ideal for the person who's actually conducting the interviews to attend all 3 of them, because each day of the training talks about different elements of conducting the interviews. Other team members are totally welcome at the training, but we're especially looking for the 1 or 2 people who will be the main driver of conducting the interviews to attend all 3 of them. If you are a grantee, you must interview at least 5 people over the project period. You're totally welcome to interview more, but the minimum is 5. And there are 2 required reports for this. And the first one is the interim report, which will be due on September 15th. And interim reports are relatively short. This is where you would explain how you have spent funds so far, and also tell us a little bit about how the project is going so far, essentially. And before that deadline, all grantees will have one-on-one meetings with me and with Jasper to verbally discuss the projects. And during those meetings, we type out notes for you to make the interim reports a little bit easier as well. But we find that having those kinds of verbal check-ins are really useful. It helps us understand your project a little bit better, and you can ask us questions. And additional check-in meetings might be scheduled for later in the project period as well. But definitely there's this initial check-in as well. Then more grant requirements. So I was saying earlier about the deliverables, and those will be due on March 3rd of 2026, which is 30 days after the end of the grant period. So all of this information would be prepared in a platform called Their Story, which is a digital platform where you can essentially upload all of the deliverables in one nice, easy area. You can also conduct interviews through Their Story, etc. And we provide extensive training on how to use this platform. And so the various deliverables would, again, be housed in the People's Archive at the DC Public Library. So these deliverables include media files, so audio files and or video files. Grantees are welcome to do either or both. Also transcripts, which are word-for-word texts of the interviews. Indexes, which are time-coded summaries of the different segments of the interview. Metadata, which provides like general information like when you did the interview, where the interview happened, names of narrators, etc. And also release forms. So like Jasper was saying earlier, this assigns copyright of the interviews to the DC Public Library. The narrator, so the person you're interviewing, does keep the non-exclusive right to copy and use and publish the interview on your own, but the release forms assigns the copyright to the library and allows the interviews to be publicly available. If you have any concerns about the public-facing nature of your project, let us know and we can talk offline about it. But just be aware that if you go through this project and you send everything to the public library, it will all be publicly available. There's really no way for us to restrict access at that point. So if you have any concerns, feel free to chat with us offline. And additionally, there will be final report due, which is also due on March 3rd, so the same date as the deliverables. And this would include an explanation of all the funds that you have spent. So this is where you would provide documentation of your expenditures, so like invoices, receipts, pay stubs, things like that. And you would also provide a project evaluation, so telling us how the project went, essentially. More information about all of this will be provided during the training, including all the grant-specific stuff like the interim and final reports. So again, don't be concerned if a lot of this doesn't make sense at this point, we will provide more information, but I did want to lay that out for all of you. Okay, so I see in the chat, Stephanie asked, if we plan to video record the interviews, must we also provide a word-by-word transcript of each interview? And yes, you do. If you do just audio, if you do video, it doesn't matter. You need to provide a transcript of each interview that you conduct. Right, so next is about fiscal sponsorship. So individuals or community groups that do not have 501c3 status are allowed to apply through a fiscal sponsor. And a fiscal sponsor assumes all financial and legal obligations of the grant. So they're the ones who would actually submit the application, and they would essentially be the grantee. They would be the ones to accept the funding, and they would also be the ones who would submit the interim and the final report. So it is up to you if you would like to apply through a fiscal sponsor. You don't have to, because this grant opportunity is open to individuals or community groups. But it is something to keep in mind, especially related to tax situations. Humanities DC does not provide tax expertise. So if you are concerned about tax ramifications about receiving a grant, I recommend you talk with an accountant or a tax lawyer about it. So if you're an individual or community group, you would rather not receive the funds yourself, but you still want to do the project, you are more than welcome to apply through a fiscal sponsor. If you don't have a fiscal sponsor in mind, we can connect you. We do have some trusted partnerships in the area, and we would be happy to connect you. No more than 10% of the total grant award can be used to pay a fiscal sponsor. So if you receive $8,000, which again is the maximum award amount you can receive if you're not translating transcripts, then $800 of that can go towards a fiscal sponsor for their own fee. And all eligibility requirements that are noted in the RFP still apply to the fiscal sponsors. So for example, the fiscal sponsor has to be registered as a 501c3 nonprofit in DC. And Humanities DC doesn't get involved in the relationship between the fiscal sponsor and the sponsored entity. So you would have to develop your own relationship and understanding if you go this route. And I know that there are a few discussions in the chat right now, but I want to bring it to the whole group. Sally asked about software to create transcripts. And a really cool thing about their story is that it is an AI software that transcribes the interviews for you. You would still have to do your own editing, obviously, it's not perfect. But it is a way to pretty quickly be able to at least do the first pass. There are other softwares available for that, but because all the deliverables go into their story anyway, we find that a lot of grantees really enjoy using their story, especially for the transcription, because that can take a while by itself. Right, now jumping to allowable and unallowable costs. So this grant program can fund a wide variety of things, including recording equipment, virtual recording platforms, honoraria, stipends, salaries and wages, publicity and promotion, etc., as well as up to 10% to go to a fiscal sponsor. Their story does, quote unquote, cover some of these allowable costs anyway. But basically, you can spend funds on various items that would allow you to collect and archive these oral history interviews. But I want to shift over especially to the right side because the grant program cannot fund a bunch of things as well. So these funds cannot fund any non-program related costs. So that would be something like general office supplies, rent or overhead or indirect or utilities. It also cannot fund food and beverages, entertainment, social activities, or fundraisers. Humanities DC does not fund tuition and scholarships, debt reduction, regranting, or any funding to government agencies. And another thing to keep in mind is that oral history interviewing grants are only to collect and archive oral history interviews. So if you're interested in doing something else with those interviews, like creating a film or a podcast or a book or an exhibit or anything like that, that is outside the scope of oral history interviewing and would be unallowable under this project. But very conveniently, we do have another grant program that would allow you to do these kinds of interpretive works, and that is called Beyond the Archives, which is a grant program where you can take oral history interviews that have already been conducted and do something cool and public with them, so taking them beyond the archives. And again, if you are interested in learning more about that, we will have a whole workshop tomorrow all about Beyond the Archives. And so before I move on, just looking at the chat. So one individual lives in Maryland and is asking about applying for the grant, or should they be connected to someone in DC in order to apply. So Humanities DC grants across the board can only be given to people who live in DC or organizations that have 501c3 status in DC, or they're an informal group that is registered in DC as well. So if you don't live in DC, you would have to find an applicant that is based in DC, and you are more than welcome to work with them on that project, but they would be actually the grantee and the applicant. Right. Also, a question about the number of applications received or accepted. So I believe that this year we are hoping for between 15 and 20 oral history interviewing grantees. And we're actually trying to increase the number of submissions. So in years past, we might have received about 30 for the past 2 years or so. Each year we've received roughly 30, 25 to 30 oral history interviewing applications, and a little less than half or so are able to get funded. And we expect that to be the case for 2025 as well. And yes, we will teach you about how to use their story. And the people who work at their story are also always available for any questions, but yes, you will definitely receive training on the platform. Okay. So with all of this information, I want to be honest with you about the time commitment for this kind of project. And so this project is not only about conducting oral history interviews, but doing all of the things around it as well. So we've had grantees in the past say it takes them roughly 20 to 50 hours of their time per interview. So that includes attending the trainings, conducting research, actually doing the interviews, editing transcripts, seeking narrator approval for these transcripts, creating the indexes and the metadata, all the reporting requirements for the grant. So it is a bigger time commitment than what might be believed at first glance. And I'm not saying this to intimidate you, but I just wanted to be honest that this is definitely a time commitment. So as you're thinking of if you want to apply for this grant or not, just keep your own schedule in mind to make sure that you would be able to do this grant. We do provide extensive assistance throughout the project, and we're always available to answer questions. But at the end of the day, it would be your project and you would be responsible to actually do it yourself. And so after you put all of the deliverables into their story, if you're curious, wanted to break down what actually happens after that. So we at Humanities DC then send all of your deliverables off to the DC Public Library, and they do quality control. So that would be something like spell check, they would fix the formatting, make sure everything is good to go, and then they would import everything into the People's Archive Digital Repository, which is DigDC, which is a fantastic online resource of oral history interviews that are public facing. It's a great opportunity and a great depository for research into the future. And once everything is actually in DigDC, everything is published, is publicly available, and it is easy to find. And I will actually show you what this looks like. So yeah, this is the DigDC webpage. There's some new formatting. The site is under construction, but you can take a look at various collections on various topics. Excuse me, on various topics, and it's just a really cool resource. And the librarians are always happy to answer questions about DigDC as well. Okay, so now before I dive deeper into the actual application, are there any questions at this point?
There were a few questions, Hillary, around whether you can pay narrators, whether you can pay yourself, and we've answered those. But yes, we strongly encourage you to pay narrators and pay yourself for your time.
Yes, please pay people for their time and labor. All right. So now let's dive into the actual application. So this is, let me redo my screen. Okay, so there are 4 categories of weighted review criteria. So although the entire application is important, there are certain elements that are especially important, and the percentages here really reflect what makes an application extra successful to the grant reviewers. I'll talk more about grant reviewers later, but in a nutshell, we have external community members, so people who have strong connections to the humanities in DC to actually review applications for us, basically. So they are the ones who will be reading through your application. They are the ones who score your application, and they are essentially the ones who choose who the grantees are. And again, I'll talk more about the review process later in the presentation. But these percentages here really reflect what would make an application successful to them. And these percentages are noted in the RFP as well as in the application itself. There are certain parts of the application that are not on here because they are not reviewed by reviewers, but they are reviewed by us at Humanities DC. So once I get through the weighted criteria explanation, I will go into the grants portal and show you. There are certain questions that reviewers do not see, just FYI. So going down the list, the first section is about capacity and personnel, and this is worth 10% of your total score. And this is all about who will actually conduct the interviews and help archive. So this is about the project director, so essentially the lead who's spearheading the project, as well as other team members and collaborators as well. You don't absolutely need team members, but you're more than welcome to have them. And so under this section is basically who will be working on the project. The second section is 25%, and that's the contribution to DC history. So this is where we would see if the stories that you want to preserve would be interesting to future researchers, residents, and the general public if they want to learn about DC. It is totally fine if your research topic is hyper local. So if you wanted to do an oral history interview project on one particular building or street, that is totally fine. But at the end of the day, all of the interviews would tell cool stories about our life in our city. The third section is 35% of the total score, and this is the project description. And this is where you would explain the scope of the area of interest or the research topic. And we are looking for clear and focused areas of interest. And this is where you would also describe why oral history is the ideal tool for this kind of project. So the two examples that I talked about earlier in this presentation for Diana and Noelle's project, that is what they wrote in this part of the application. So this is where you would talk about really what your project is. Then the last section that reviewers would look at is for 30% of your score, and that is for community collaboration. And this is how you would involve the community in your project. You note what kind of recruitment plan for finding narrators is. You have ideas for potential narrators as well. If you have a connection to the community, you talk about that. And if you don't, you describe how you will forge connections with that community. Okay, now I'm going to do a deep dive in the key application questions. At the very top of this slide is the grants portal instructions. This information is on our website, and this is basically how to how to create an account in our grants portal and how to actually submit your application. So I want to show you what that grants portal looks like. Okay. All right, so all of these sections are the different sections of the application. What you would see on your screen as an applicant will look a little bit different from this. This is how things look on the back end to us, but I wanted to show it from this angle to illustrate all of the potential sections that you might see as an applicant. It is totally possible that you will not see all of these sections because some of them would only pop up if you answer in a certain direction to a previous question. But these are all of the potential sections, and I will go step by step. But really quickly, I see in the chat, someone asked, would we most likely not be selected if we are doing this project solo? Not necessarily. We have had grantees in which this is just their project. They are one person doing everything without any team members. That's okay. And we have had grantees that have a whole team behind them. So it doesn't really matter as long as you fill out the application correctly. All right. So the first section up here is the review process. It talks a little bit about the overarching review process, more information about becoming grant reviewers and what's involved in that whole process as well. And then a reminder down here about the fact that this grant is only to collect and archive oral history interviews. It is not for any public-facing projects otherwise. So this grant cannot fund films, publications, exhibits, podcasts, or anything else like that. That would be, again, under Beyond the Archives. So the first few sections are all about the applicant. I won't go into detail about all of these. It would basically about who is actually applying, if you're an organization versus an individual, where you're located, things like that. Then a section about previous grant experience with us. It is totally fine if you have been a grantee of ours. It is totally fine if you have not. Reviewers do not see a response in this section. This is more as an FYI for us. about previous grants that you've been a part of in the past. Yep, and if you're an organizational applicant, this section will pop up and you would talk about the mission statement of the organization, why that organization is actually applying for this project, etc. And if you're an individual applicant, then this section would pop up. And if you are an individual applicant, you must provide proof of age and DC residency. Reviewers do not see this kind of information. That's just for us on staff. And if a fiscal sponsor is submitting it, then this section would pop up in which they would talk about who they're sponsoring or what organization they are sponsoring. So the first major section of the weighted review criteria, again, is capacity and key personnel. So the first parts is about the project director. And let's go down here, under the statement of interest, this is where you would write about your passion about your project. Why do you actually want to do it? The project director is the driver of the project activities. They're also usually the point of contact for any programmatic questions. So just tell us why you're interested in doing it. What motivated you to get involved? Next is the team members. Again, you don't necessarily need team members. Most projects do benefit from it, just because if it's just one person, then they have to do everything. So team members can help share the load. It creates more community buy-in, etc. But again, if you want to only work as one person, you don't want to work with a team, that is totally fine as well. Next section is another aspect that is not reviewed by the reviewers. This is just for us at Humanities DC. And this will ask about your familiarity with oral history interviewing. Like I said earlier, all grantees would have to attend the workshops in early to mid-May. But your response here allows us and the trainers to understand a little bit about where you're coming from. And again, it is totally fine if you have never conducted oral history interviewing before. Next section is the contribution to DC history, so the 25% of your total score. And this is where you would describe how your project will contribute to insights about DC's history. Again, it is totally fine for your project to be hyper-local. And we do recommend that as you think about your project scope, that you do keep it somewhat narrow, just because of everything that's involved in oral history interviewing, the fact that you only need you need a minimum of 5 interviews. You won't be able, probably, to really conduct interviews about the entirety of DC history. So we do recommend that you narrow your topic down to something that would be more manageable for the scope of this project. But this is where you would talk about the contribution to DC history and really what makes your project interesting to other researchers and DC residents into the future. Next section is the project description, which again is 35% of your total score. And this is where you would put your area of interest or your research topic. So again, this is the 2 examples that I provided for Deanna and Noelle's projects. What was on the slides is what they wrote word for word in this area. So this is where you would describe the area of interest or the research topic you hope to explore, and also why oral history is ideal for this kind of project. This is where you would check off one of the humanities disciplines that you think your project falls under. Totally fine if you have more than one discipline, but this is where you would note the major discipline. And again, all projects must interview at least 5 people. Next is the timeline. And this is where you would note an idea of which steps of your project would happen when. And we do ask you to be as detailed as possible in this. But also, this section, this question is not reviewed by the evaluators as well. This is just reviewed by us on staff at Humanities DC. And we do this because after the trainings in May, we would provide you an opportunity to update the timeline. We understand, especially for brand new oral historians, it might be a little unclear about exactly what timeline would look like for you. So after the trainings, we do give you an opportunity to revise it. But we on staff, we do want to hear about your thoughts at least, but just be aware that reviewers will not look at your response to this question. However, the timeline would have to be during the grant period, which is between May 1st, 2025 through January 31st of 2026. So all of the steps, all of the activities for the grant must happen between these two dates, not before May 1st, not after January 31st, and also all funds must be spent during this timeline as well. And then if you want to translate your transcripts into another language, this is where you would toggle if you want to do that or not. And if you do toggle it, so if you do want to translate your transcripts into another language, then this section would pop up. And this is asking like what languages you want to translate the oral history transcripts into, and also where you would describe why you want to do that. Translating transcripts can make the stories that you collect more accessible to the communities you work with. So if you want to conduct interviews with Latino residents in DC, to make those transcripts more accessible to that community, it might make sense to translate those transcripts into Spanish, as an example. The funds that you might receive for this translation enhancement, again, is up to $5,000, and it is only for translating the transcripts. So if you want an interpreter at the interview, or if you want to translate other elements of your project, like any outreach materials, that is typically not covered by the translation enhancement pool of funds. But you can use the other funds you receive in order to do that instead. And if you have questions about translation, happy to talk offline as well. The next section is community collaboration, which would be 30% of your total score. And this is where you would talk about why you chose that particular community. How are you connected to that community? Or if you're not, how will you forge connections within it? This is also a question asking about how you will recruit narrators for the project. It is totally fine if you don't exactly know where or how to recruit narrators. We are asking you just to be thoughtful, to have an idea in mind of what community you want to interview. And also, we're asking, how will narrators and their communities be actively involved in the project beyond just providing their stories? So perhaps you're thinking that they could help connect you with other narrators, they could help scout locations for the interviews, etc. And again, we're just looking to see if you are thinking about this in advance. An optional question is all about something called the community shareback session. Grantees are allowed to have a small private event to share back the collected oral histories directly with the narrators and their local community. These are not big public programs that would be, open to everyone in DC, so it's semi-private. But you are allowed to put some funds aside specifically for this kind of shareback session. And your response to this question is optional, and it is also not evaluated by the reviewers. It's just for us on staff. Okay, then some more questions about demographics of your target audience. Then the next section is the budget. So the budget is not reviewed by reviewers. It is just reviewed by us on staff. And just like with what I said earlier, how you can, update the timeline after the trainings in May, you would also be allowed to update the budget. Because again, we realize that especially brand new oral historians might not know exactly how much things cost. We'll go over ideas for your budget during the trainings, but we are asking you to still submit this with your application, which again will only be reviewed by us on staff. So I'll quickly go through the categories. It's a pretty short budget. So the first row is honoraria. So this is what you would pay to narrators or community participants for their time. So I know someone asked earlier about paying narrators, and here's a whole row where you can put how much you would like to pay your narrators for their time, for their efforts with telling you their story. The second section is salaries and wages. So these are typically funds that will be paid to the project team members, so the project director, the interviewer, etc. And it is okay the definitions of honoraria and salary, it can be a little bit loose. So if you're an organization, for example, and your organization is all volunteers and you're uncomfortable saying that you pay them a salary, you can plop those funds into honoraria. It doesn't totally matter. We do separate it out here because in usual cases, honoraria is what you pay to narrators and salary is what you pay to the project team members. But as long as you explain your reasoning about like why different dollar amounts are in each budget category, that's totally fine. But we do separate them out here in the budget table at least. Travel is if you want to travel to different parts of DC to actually conduct the interviews, that would be in this row. Supplies, this is where you would put things like recording equipment and microphones. Translation, if you are requesting the translation enhancements, this is where you would put those funds in this row. And then the other category, anything else that doesn't fit neatly into any of the above budget categories. And here's the budget narrative. And this is where you would put an explanation of all the funds that you would like to use, basically. So everything that is in the budget table should be described in the budget narrative. You are welcome to note more complicated calculations if you have any. Like if you are making a calculation for staff salaries, for example, you can provide the equation right in this box. But basically everything that's in the budget table has to be described within the budget narrative. And I do want to say that for all applicants across the board, it's really the budget that people are the most concerned about. And I do want to emphasize that budgets are plans. Like I said earlier, we provide you the opportunity to update your budget at the very beginning of the project period after you do the training. Throughout the project period, if you would like to redirect funds again, that is totally fine. We understand that unexpected expenses might pop up, things might cost differently from what you expect, etc. And that is totally fine. So please don't be overly worried or concerned about the budget narrative or the budget table, because again, you can move funds around later on in the project. Next is the appendix. This is an optional section where you can upload additional items, basically. So if you would like to do any like video responses to any of the above questions, letters of commitment, planning documents, resumes, etc., you're more than welcome to put that here. And also, we tell reviewers that they should only be looking at information that is in the application. So they won't be looking up your website or your social media handles or anything like that. If you do want reviewers to look at that, the appendix is a great place for you to put that external information if you think that that will strengthen your application. Next section is about accessibility. This section would only pop up if you are an organizational applicant that has 15 or more people on staff. This section especially focuses on complying with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this asks about your organization's accessibility plans, talking about the organization itself, asking about communications access, things like that, which again, it would only be relevant to organizations that have 15 or more people on staff. If you do not fall into that category, so if your organization is smaller than that, or if you're applying to be an individual, this section will not pop up. But I do recommend that you still think about accessibility throughout your project for the disability community, as well as all communities. Then the last part is where you actually sign off on the application. So if you are applying through a fiscal sponsor, the fiscal sponsor's representative would sign off here. If you are applying yourself, this is where you would sign off on the application. Whew. All right, so that is the application. Okay, so looking at the chat, so Lisa asked, so since video recordings are very large files, does paying for storage space for the files fit under the category of supplies? So let's look at the budget again. So yeah, it definitely can. With storage space, you would be able to conduct the interviews through their story. But if you want to do it outside of their story and you are paying for additional storage space, then yeah, supplies could be a good spot for you to put those funds. Or under other, it's up to you as long as you explain everything in the budget narrative section. All right. So I realize I just gave you a lot of information, and I know we're coming up to the end of our time here, but does anyone have any questions about the application?
Oh, shit.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I put it in the chat to you. I would like to know, is it mandatory that we add age and ethnicity on the application?
Let's see. Okay, so the applicant themselves does not. But let me. Yeah, so you as the applicant, you do not have to put your own age or your own ethnicity. We do have these required questions for the target audience. So if you are hoping to conduct interviews in a particular ethnic or racial community, you would check off whatever boxes are applicable. There is a box for general population, if it is indeed for the whole population. Or if you're uncomfortable being more specific on that. And same thing for the age too.
Thank you.
I had a question. If you start the application but don't finish it, can you then keep coming back until it's final?
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thanks.
At the very bottom of the application, there would be a button for save. So definitely if you want to go back and forth from the application. Make sure to just save your work. Like with everything on the internet, you don't want to lose it. But yeah, you do not have to do all of this in a single setting.
As a follow-up on that, is your advice, like, it seems to me, to draft statements in a word processor and then cut and paste them on? It seems like that's one of the fluky things about the Arts Commission's applications. So
yeah, I mean, it is something that we suggest as an option, especially since the grants portal can be a little clunky for people sometimes. So if it's easier for you to write it in a separate word processor and copy in, that's totally fine.
Thank you.
Hillary, if you've already submitted something in the portal, would you have to open up a new account, or would you already be in there and you could just log into your existing account and start from there?
You would log into your existing account. Yeah, we asked you to not create a new account if you already have one in the grants portal, please. Right. So I know we are coming up to our time. I'm still going to continue to the end of the presentation. This whole thing will be recorded and sent out, but if any of you have to leave, because I know we only scheduled this for an hour and a half, that's totally fine. But I'm going to close us out. If I can. All right. So a lot of what I just explained is in the slides as well. So when you see the slides in the recording, you would be able to go back to reference these. Okay. So now I want to talk about, more generally speaking, what a successful application would look like. So successful here means that the reviewers would probably score your application pretty highly. So a lot of the information on this slide reflects the weighted review criteria that I talked about earlier as well. So successful applications have clear and detailed research questions. They would provide compelling contributions to DC history. You would explain why oral history is the best format for the project. Personnel roles are defined. You have at least ideas about how to connect with the community, etc. Also, with what I said earlier, these funds would only be for collecting and archiving new oral history interviews. You can budget a little bit of funds to host that small shareback session, but remember, this is not for hosting big public events, creating podcasts, editing videos, etc. We also ask to review Dig DC. So that is the People's Archive at the DC Public Library before you submit your application, ideally, because it would be great if you propose collecting oral history interviews that have not been recorded and archived in the public library just yet, because we're always looking for news stories about different communities around the city. So we do recommend that you review Dig DC in advance, just to make sure that you're not basically doubling someone else's efforts that's already in there. And the biggest thing that we tell potential applicants is that you should be as detailed as possible in your entire application. There is a lot of space in the application for you to be able to write text to your heart's content, but we ask for you to be as detailed as possible. Even if you don't have all the answers, even if you're not completely sure about what you want to do, as long as you provide as many details as possible, that will really help, because that allows the reviewers to understand what you're trying to do for your project. And really, if you remember all of the above, bullet points on this slide, it is totally fine if you do not have any oral history experience, because ideally you would still be very clear. You would provide an explanation about why this would be a compelling contribution to DC history. You would define personnel roles, etc. So you not having any experience with oral history interviews, it really wouldn't be a big problem at all, as long as you remember elements from this slide. Then on the flip side, there are some common application issues. This is information that we have gotten from reviewers as well as what we have noticed on staff. So for example, your project scope is too broad. So instead of being narrow and concise and succinct, like the project scope should be, you're trying to do a little bit too much for the scope of the project. Another issue is that you don't explain the importance of the project to DC history or why oral history is the best format for the project. There are unclear descriptions, and also it looks like your application was written quickly, too quickly. So we definitely recommend to start the application as soon as possible, just because it might take you longer than you expect. We definitely recommend that you do not start the application on the due date, but really try to work on it over time. And the biggest issue that we have seen is that applications would not be detailed enough. So again, flip side of the previous slide, things are too vague. You don't provide explanations for things. That's the biggest problem that we have seen. And at Humanities DC, we provide an opportunity for us to review your draft application before you submit it. So if you want to take advantage of that, more information about that is in the request for proposal. But basically, if you let us know at least 1 week before the application deadline that you would like someone on staff to review your application before you actually submit it, we can do that. We cannot tell you if you will definitely be funded or not, because again, that's an external review process, but we can see if your answers were not detailed enough. We might offer suggestions on different things you can emphasize a little bit more. We're basically an external set of eyes for that we allow for draft applications before you submit it. But again, if you want to do that, please let us know at least a week in advance for us to have time to review everything. Okay, so the very last part of the presentation is about the review process, and that's the last part of the presentation. But at this point, does anyone have any questions?
Hey, good afternoon again. How you doing?
I did have a question. Just dealing with the translation.
Yeah.
Does DC Library provide translation services for those that are hearing impaired, and or could the extended amount be used towards translating for those that are hearing impaired? Like I guess in Braille, possibly.
Good question. So I'm not sure about the DC government necessarily. One of our previous grantees was Gallaudet University, and they were able to use translation funds for ASL interpretation. So I would.
I work with them a lot. That's why I asked.
Yeah. So yeah, the short answer, yes. We can talk more offline about it. But yes, we should be able to make that work.
have a question. Can you use narrators that are knowledgeable about DC but live outside of the DC area?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, one more question.
Yeah.
When conducting oral history, are you able to take the account of, let's say, a relative, like someone that was speaking on behalf of their parents or grandparents, something that they shared with them possibly? Is that credible, or it has to be from someone that actually experienced, I guess, what it is your topic may be about?
I mean, would your family members provide their own perspectives of the event?
Yeah, uh, I guess the person that you were interviewing, they would have, that info. They may have the information. Let's say, like, for example, the person that was online that was speaking about veterans, and so some, a grandson, a great great grandson may recall a story, that his father mentioned about their father, his grandfather or great grandfather. Um, and so just, obviously the great great grandfather is no longer with us, but the story is still within the family. And it may, just trying to see whether or not that would be possible, or should it just really come from someone that actually has experienced what it is your topic may be about.
Yeah. So let's see. Narrators usually are people who have experienced the historical event, because you would be asking them about their lives. But if you're trying to get stories of past experiences and stories have been going through the family history, that could still be a valid project. You would just explain that whole situation in the application. It's just usually the narrators are the people who have directly lived through whatever topic you're talking about.
I understand that aspect of it. I was just saying, like, for example, if it was about cooking, hypothetically, and I was interviewing you, and it was about a recipe that your grandmother, um, you know, that came through your great great grandmother passed through the family, and you're actually sharing this recipe with me and why it's so good and what it's able to do. Is that okay for my stories about this recipe? Although the story did not come specifically from the person that actually created it, which was, the great great grandma.
Yeah, I think the same thing applies, how usually narrators are the people who have firsthand experience of the issue topic. Um, I mean, but Jasper, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it would still be a valid project even if you're getting that quote unquote secondhand knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I would go back to like just say, oral history as a practice kind of goes beyond the modern technology that we use now. Like it goes beyond the virtual recording, like even beyond kind of taking recorders out to, different places and capturing things on records and on cassettes. Oral history has been done for thousands and thousands of years, and one of the things that it was originally used for was to pass on family traditions from generation to generation. So yeah, as Hillary said, like it's definitely about capturing the personal individual experience of the person you're interviewing, but it's um, I would almost say like an enhancement, or it can be part of it, or it can be like one of the, things that can be used to also transmit like family stories, traditions, values, and things like that from generation to generation. So, if I'm understanding the question correctly, like when those situations come up, when the narrator has the chance to relate a family story or a family tradition and how they personally experience that. Like that can be a really incredible part of an oral history interview.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jasper. Any other questions before I talk about the review process? All right, let's close this out strong. So all submitted applications are reviewed by Humanities DC staff for something called eligibility. So this is when we see if we can theoretically fund your project. So for example, if your organization is applying for funding, we check your 501c3 status at this point. And if we determine that your application is eligible, that moves on to the next stage, which is the review process. And so, like I said earlier, reviewers are community members who have strong ties to the humanities in DC. Many reviewers for this particular grant program already have experience conducting oral histories themselves. And reviewers score applications that are based on the weighted review criteria, which again is available in the RFP, in the application, and on these slides. And if you're interested in reviewing grant applications, we highly encourage you to do so. And more information about that is on our website. You can be both a grant applicant and a grant reviewer, but you would just not review applications for the same grant program you're applying to, because that would be kind of unfair. But you're more than welcome to do both. And in the past, applicants, grantees, and future applicants have been reviewers, and they get a lot out of the experience. As a reviewer, you can learn about really cool projects and organizations all over DC, and you get a really strong understanding of what makes a strong application, because the reviewers are the ones to note which applications are strong. It's also a great networking opportunity with other humanists around the DC area. And also, if you complete a review cycle, you would receive a $250 honorarium as a thank you for volunteering. So if you are interested in reviewing applications, please take a look at our website. You can also reach out to me directly if you're interested. I highly encourage you to think about reviewing for us. And so once the application review process on the reviewer side ends, then us on staff do a review of the highly scored applicants, which are the likely grantees. So this is where we would read through parts of your applications ourselves. And at this time, the Humanities DC board affirms that we on staff followed the appropriate review process. So our funding is not chosen by our board, and it's not chosen by our staff. The grantees are essentially chosen by the external reviewers. So the board affirms that we on staff followed the appropriate process. And then all eligible applicants are told if they get funding or not about 8 weeks after the application deadline, which is pretty fast in nonprofit world. But we know that you're all ready and raring to go. So you will be told if you get funding or not about 8 weeks after the application deadline. And then if you are chosen as a grantee, then you would receive your funds roughly 2 weeks after you're notified that you are a new grantee. And that is it. I mean, the last slide here is my contact information, my direct email, and my direct phone line, as well as the grants inbox, which is viewable to the whole grants team. We do review this email inbox every day. So yeah, this is the contact info for me. And with that, that is the presentation. So thank you all to the people who have stayed with us to the bitter end. So sorry for going over. As you can see, there was just a lot of information here. So at this point, before we really close out, are there any final questions? All right. So again, thank you all so much for being here for today's workshop. Again, this has been recorded. We will send you the recording and the slides shortly. It will also be posted on our website. If you have any questions in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to me, to Leah, to Jasper, to the whole grants team. We're always available to help. Also on our website, we have something called office hours where you can sign up for one-on-one conversations with